Good morning to our guests from the United States and a good evening to those joining from Europe. Welcome to Wine Talks, brought to you by Wine Unites. Wine Unites is a global platform for wine professionals focused on knowledge sharing and peer support. Globally, wine producers face many of the same challenges, and Wine Unites brings together subject matter experts to provide unique perspectives and novel solutions to shared challenges. Wine Talks is one such platform for industry experts to share their views and perspectives on topics ranging from climate change and sustainability to technology and viticulture. For more information, you can always write to hello@wineunites.com. Today, I'd like to welcome Doug Frost, Master of Wine and Master Sommelier, and one of only 4 people in the world to hold both titles. Doug has written 3 books, created and hosted TV shows, founded and judged wine competitions, and consults with many retailers, restaurateurs, wineries, distillers, and even an airline. He's founded a spirits and cocktail educational organization, won numerous awards, is the co-creator of Echoland's Winery, and he's a fan of punk rock, something I would love to hear more about as well. Today, Doug will talk to us about natural wine, what this whole movement is all about, and what it takes to make non-sulfite wine. Once this talk is over, guests are welcome to send in their questions using the question and answer feature. And with that said, thank you so much for joining us, Doug. Really looking forward to this. Over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll have to state for the record that I don't consider myself a subject matter expert when it comes to this issue, but it was certainly something that I wanted to talk about because I do have, I hope, a perspective that's somewhat useful. But this began really with Karen asking me to speak on sustainable viticulture. And while we're doing interesting things at Echolands in Walla Walla with like biochar and such, I had to demur and just say, well, you know, again, I don't really feel like I'm an honest speaker in that regard, because we have yet to get, I mean, this year will be the first actual crop we've gotten off our vineyards. So what do I know, right? I mean, I'll use it as an illustration that the vineyard manager and I have been not quite at loggerheads, but certainly have been arguing about the fact that we have been quote unquote organic up to now, and can we remain that when I'm quite concerned about the number of leaf hoppers and the mites that we're dealing with out there. And as she pointed out, she said, well, look, you know, I get that you want to do the right thing by the place and the vineyard, but do you think it's really better for us to have to go through once a week, driving tractors up and down those rows, spewing CO2, wasting gasoline, so that we can use a quote organic spray? Or what if we went through there once with some miticide and just called it a day? And the answer to that is, I don't know. I haven't figured that one out yet. The answer to that is that the world is not comprised of black and white, no matter how much, frankly, if you'll allow a little bit of a rant to sneak in, no matter how much some of the people who are promoting the idea of natural wine would like it to be so. It ain't so. And the sooner we grapple with that, I think the better off we are. I think honest actors need to admit that these are issues that remain unsettled. But if that's true, how do we actually go and talk about it? One of my mentors, Clark Smith, is on this call as well, and I was going to reference him anyway. I still remember a comment he made years ago, which is, you know, for all these Luddites that think wine technology is bad, then why are you using air conditioning and stainless steel? I mean, those are 20th century modern technological innovations that have, at least in my view, have clearly improved the wine industry, have improved wines as a whole, and have enabled wine to spread to many other places around the world and around the globe that would not be otherwise. Having said that, I have to admit, the first time I went to a raw festival, which is some years ago, you know, back when we used to gather together, crazy times. And I still remember that experience. I looked around the room, and one, the average age was younger than most of the wine festivals that I attend. So I was impressed by that, but it really wasn't that. It was really the looks on the faces of people who were there. I hadn't seen anything like it in, I don't know, 35 years, when the wine industry, at least for me, was really young in the United States, and the passion and the enthusiasm, just the sheer lust for what was happening around us was crazy. Those are crazy making times. We were discovering new wines constantly. And I saw that same look on these people's faces. And I realized I hadn't seen it in decades. I hadn't seen anything like that in decades. And it gave me pause. And having said that, I also can think of some friends of mine who have a quote unquote natural wine retail store here in Kansas City, where I live. And they're very nice people, and I like them very much, and they're doing their damnedest. But they have their rules about what goes in there, and there are things like no yeast additions and no mallow additions and no additions other than oak, really. And I think to myself, well, that's funny. That's how I make wines, and yet they won't put my wines in there. I'm not bitching. I'm rather than complaining. It's more a matter of what is the mindset that is in my view reflected by those behaviors and by those passions. And as someone who loves wine and loves the wine industry and believes that it's a good thing for humans, I really would like to know, how do I respect that? How do I think about that appropriately? When I bring this subject up with my winemaker, a man named Taylor Oswald, I know that winemakers work on a tightrope. There's a lot of money at stake. They certainly don't want to refuse to use anything if it will save a harvest. But as importantly, or more importantly, they don't want to use anything other than what is absolutely necessary, because the more stuff you do to wine, the less the wine usually is. So it is that I'm connecting the natural wine movement, maybe appropriately or inappropriately, to the ingredient labeling consideration that is being discussed from a regulatory standpoint in Europe, much discussed as a marketing or aesthetic effort here in the U.S. But I want to also bring to bear this notion of transparency. Not too long ago, Tom Work was complaining about this. Why is transparency so necessary? Why this zeal for telling everybody what goes in there? And I'm sure if Taylor were on this call, he'd be like, "Yeah, shut up," because he says that a lot, and it's probably a good idea, because I'm not a winemaker. I just hang out with one, and really just a few weeks ago, I was taken to task by a winemaker who I greatly respect. And I was taken to task because I have been bitching about the 2020 vintage, i.e. the 2020 vintage on the West Coast, where, not uniformly, but certainly there is a dominant amount of wine that has been impacted by smoke. And I don't particularly like smoke damage on my wines, because in general, we're trying to make wines that are a little more nuanced, elegant, lower alcohols, higher acidity, not a lot of oak, yada, yada, yada. And smoke's going to stick out pretty badly. And I am still grappling with my friend's complaint with my being so vocal about the fact that 2020 has been impacted by smoke. So many wines have been. And I have to say, yes, but my disappointment in my industry is based on this continued lack of transparency, when wine really ought to be the most transparent of alcohol beverages. But aside from like Ridge and Randall Graham and Amaro and a few other people's efforts, transparency in winemaking in the form of ingredient labeling is non-existent. And I guess what I wanted to say in writ small in this conversation is that because we have not filled the airwaves, shall we say, with that what I think is honest, open, proud attitude towards these things that we make, the airwaves are going to get filled up by somebody else. And they have been indeed filled up by people who I think some be well-intentioned, some may be even doing a good thing. I mean, I go to raw festivals, right? You know, I check out what's going on there. But having said that, certainly the most egregious example of all this is the term clean wine. The idea that therefore my wine is clean and so yours is dirty. And it reflects the title of this conversation, that if my wine is natural, then yours must be. Yeah. So it's just marketing bullshit. Okay, you know, let's just, it's easy to state that. As one intrepid reporter pointed out in an article a few months ago, it isn't hard to figure out that one of these so-called clean wine sales people is selling Wente Monterey Chardonnay for $25 a bottle under a private label, but you could buy it for $18 a bottle from the winery. So what's natural about yours that's unnatural about the wineries? I don't wish to name names, Cameron Diaz, but it's like these are people who probably don't know very much about this subject matter, and therefore fall prey, and probably have the greatest of intentions in all of this. But it is, in my view, important for us to ask, what are the messages that are having an impact? What are the messages that resonate with the people who are signing up for this stuff, the people who buy these wines? So we'll take it a piece at a time. The term tossed around a lot is pure and pure natural wine, that it's organically grown on family farms, that it has been independently tested by a laboratory for purity. Purity, it's sugar-free with no additives. How would you know that? I mean, sugar is easy, and there aren't really a lot of sweet wines out there. Certainly, there has been a trend towards some residual sugar. Takes us all the way back to the 80s with Kendall Jackson. But those are relatively minor issues, minor amounts of sugar. They certainly are going to have a caloric impact, but I'm not sure how that makes them unclean in some way. Any arrested or prevented fermentation is going to leave you some residual sugar, and I happen to be a tremendous fan of Haupttrocken German wines. Okay, account for the higher level of sugar, which you can do because you have less alcohol. All right, that's another thing that they like to talk about, that everybody else has high levels of sugar, alcohol, and up to 76 FDA-approved additives. Pure natural wine is rare. We estimate that less than 0.1% of the world's wines meet our strict criteria, which I guess is true because you sell less than 0.01% of the world's wines. But what the hell? What other strict criteria? To me, there's a lot of a shell game going on here. But certainly the terms organic and the terms biodynamic will be repeated. Vegan, okay, most wines are vegan if you really want to think of it that way. Nobody uses ox blood anymore. So some people use egg whites to find, and it does remove particles. It does remove tannin. I've never really seen the great need for it. And for some people, it's a more natural and traditional way of fining. Paper filters work pretty well too. So, our bentonite soil, okay, yeah. But there is one trend within it all that I have to admit I'm trying to follow the best I can, which is a trend towards lower alcohols. And I see the sense behind that. For one thing, I grew up in an era, I was drinking wines of the 70s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s before wines were routinely 14 and 15% alcohol. And I got used to drinking wines like that, and I liked wines like that. And so I thought, when we started a winery, if we could make wines that have under 14% alcohol, that would be cool. If we can have some that are under 13%, that would be super cool. And so, yeah, I'm singing out of the same hymnal. So as I say, I'm not trying to explain this as a black and white view. It is rather that we must learn from this passion, but we must also take responsibility for the fact that the misinformation is out there because we have not acted, because we have not been responsible, in my view. Then the other term that of course, the other focus that comes to bear constantly is the use of sulfite. With the raw festival, it's 70 ppm or lower. With some of these retailers, it's 75 ppm or lower. Again, I can look at some of the wines that are being offered for sale and believe, at least my view is, no, they're not. Indeed, being at raw festivals, walking around and asking people questions. So, tell me about the wine. Do you hit it with sulfur when the must comes in? Oh yeah, maybe a little bit. I'm like, okay, what are you, like 25? Oh yeah, maybe. And I'm like, and how often do you hit it? Oh, maybe only when needed, maybe once, twice. And I was like, just to bump it up to like 30, 35. Yeah. But do you also sulfur it before bottling? Oh yeah, I'm doing the math, going, well, that's 80 or 90, but whatever. It's more about I'm complaining. I'm not complaining, I should say. I'm just trying to observe and understand, why is that important to people? And I'll stick up for the raw festival in this case, because I have walked around there and tasted wines that have definitely less sulfite in them, and believe my palate when my palate says, there's something going on here. There's some vibrancy that may or may not be due to the lower levels of sulfite. I don't know that. All I know is that I'm intrigued and want to know more, and believe that there is something there. I just don't, I'm just expressing my ignorance, that I'm not sure I know what to conclude from that yet. Others smarter than me certainly have their opinions as well. But to move on for a second is to talk about these other buzzwords, that it's friendly to keto, it's friendly to paleo, free of toxic additives. I believe our other wines are too, because you know what I haven't done after drinking certain commercial scale, large scale wine production wines? I haven't died yet. I didn't even, get sick from the toxic additives. It was the alcohol that did the trick, in good ways and bad. That the producers will, or I should say these retailers will talk about, oh, we use less water. One is just focusing solely on dry farmed wines, which produce quote unquote stronger and better, healthier fruit. Do they? Really? I don't know, man. I've seen some stress vine syndrome show up in wines that are really unhappy, sad wines. And, a little bit of drip irrigation. Well, as somebody smarter than me once said, you should not be prepared to outlaw irrigation unless you were also prepared to outlaw rain. Okay, well, the issue that I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but the issue is, if you're buying natural wine and they say you're getting good, clean wine and that's it, is that necessarily true? And I would say, okay, I don't know, again, if you've walked around at a raw festival, but the chief aromatic compound that I run into, particularly with the non-European producers that are there, is mousiness. I don't know if you've been fortunate enough to enjoy the 2-acetyl tetrahydropyridine joys of mouse taint. But of course, if you know about them, forgive me for relating this, and if you don't, mousiness is typically not something that you will smell. It is something instead that once you put the wine in your mouth and your saliva adjusts the pH, those compounds become more volatile and aromatic, and you're left with the distinct impression that a gerbil has just taken a shit in your mouth. I know this, I don't know this, but I know something similar to this because I had 2 young children who have now grown, and always insisted on not cleaning the gerbil's cage. It was annoying. And so I know that smell really well, and I don't want that in my wine. I, not too long ago, read from a natural wine enthusiast, writer, who was really a bit unhappy with the fact that we were not indulging her learning process as a brand new winemaker, and insisted that mouse-tainted wine, which was, she had admitted what she had made, will probably go away. No, it won't. It won't. Okay, it's not what happens. So it's an unhappy thing for me that we have an entire generation, in my view, that have been told that this is wine. It's not dissimilar, I suppose, to a generation, my generation, that thought Brettanomyces was the smell of terroir in Bordeaux. No, it wasn't. But that's what we thought, because that's what Bordeaux was. That's how you picked up a glass of Bordeaux and knew, oh, this is Bordeaux. It smells like a horse's ass. That this is the Rhone. It smells like a horse's ass, and maybe some other things too. So we've all been viewing wine through different lenses. And I want to make certain that we answer what I think are reasonable complaints about what has, how the wine industry has evolved, and how we are very secretive about what we do, when we ought to be more, in my view, more open about it, because in my view, we have nothing to be ashamed of. We are making, there's more delicious wine on this planet than there's ever been. And it's more available at more price points than it has ever been. So those so-called additives that we around the world are allowed to use, like fining agents or defoaming agents, never had to use those. Preservatives, I mean, sulfite, SO2, okay, fine. We use tiny amounts of that, which of course everybody, I think, online already knows this whole tale, that was vilified and made a labeling requirement by a group of people who are as anti-alcohol as they could be, and they saw it as an opportunity to slow down the people's consumption of alcohol. Not a terrible thing in and of itself, but I think it was subterfuge and deceit at work, because the amount of sulfite utilized in a wine is a fraction of that which is utilized in many other food substances, particularly dried fruits, okay, which have many times more sulfite utilized in them, and on and on. In the words of one of these websites, you never quite know what you'll get when you open a bottle of natural wine. Is that a good thing? It is one of the characteristics of the modern era, that we were able to codify and to regulate, and then, if you will, to make bland food substances, because we made them safe to consume. And so these are countervailing propositions that I'm throwing out here, because clearly what I'm trying to make with the winery that I have helped create is a wine that reflects its place, a wine that reflects its vintage, whether it's a smoky vintage or not, a wine that is, I hope, honest about how it was made, and certainly where it is made, and the people who made it. So in frankly, vilifying some of these websites and some of these retailers that focus exclusively on natural wine, it is not necessarily because they are championing natural wine. If those wines are clean, they are delicious. Because I felt like I could not speak unless I had made an effort in this direction. With the winery, with Echolands Winery, Taylor and I make a pet nat, and it has virtually no measurable sulfite whatsoever. And that's by design, because I wanted to know, can that be done? And it's not a matter of chance. It's a matter of skill. Taylor's skill in coaxing this wine through its fermentation without ever having to resort to sulfite to try to keep things from going south. And we've made 3 vintages in a row that are delicious and fresh and have no mouse stain or other issues, and have no measurable sulfite in them. And so, yeah, let's face it, the bubbles help. Bubbles help keep things at bay. We have to obviously control temperature. We have to be super cautious in making this wine, but we haven't had to add other things. And so, in my view, if you will allow me, to me, it was proof of concept. Look, you can do this. And my experiences at Raw are precisely the same. I walk around and I taste a lot of wines that I think are very sad. And I walk around and I taste some wines that I think are absolutely wonderful. And I'm frustrated that there is no differentiation one from the other, because there must be. That is our responsibility. And we can't speak about it honestly if we are not being honest and transparent about the way those wines are made and the way our wines are made, and allowing for a comparison of those products. Okay, so most importantly, I guess I would conclude by saying that it is, for me, what makes wine remarkable and has throughout time is that wine can reflect a particular place. That is to say, it can be an individual product that tastes of an individual and specific place, and which cannot be duplicated in any meaningful way. It can only come from that place in order to have that set of flavors. We can argue all day long how true terroir really is, how many people actually taste it or are aware of it. I don't give a damn. The fact that people can blind taste wine and identify where the wine comes from accurately, and people do all the time, is living proof. Faults cover up terroir. They cover up the good things. It's certainly also true that the character of wine 100 years ago was as much dependent, let's say, on volatile acidity as it was on fruit or terroir, for that matter. And there are still wines that exhibit those characteristics, and they can be fascinating. I'm looking at you, Sherry. I mean, not Sherry, I've forgotten your last name, but the wine, Madeira, some Rioja, on and on and on. To me, doesn't really matter. The issue is that the character of modern wine and the success of modern wine has been built upon a retained fresh fruit character. You're going to need technology for that. You're going to need sulfites for that. For most people, that's what good wine is. So that's kind of the be all and end of it all. So it was a bit of a rant, and I'll admit that. But I just want to ask the question, is it appropriate for us to challenge the industry to do an about face and start to be more transparent, start to have a more in-depth and more honest conversation about how we make wine? Because in my view, we have nothing to be ashamed of.
Thank you, Doug. My first reaction to that is it's wonderfully refreshing to see an honest, frank opinion.
Yeah, and I'm looking through some of the comments, and I love Brett Eisenhower pointing out, absolutely true, that zero sulfites can lead to biogenic amines, which we now, I think, are reasonably concluding are more the cause of the so-called, red wine headache or white wine headache if you're in Bordeaux. The allergic responses, it has nothing to do with sulfite levels per se. So yeah, there are dangers associated with, or at least great challenges associated with the use of zero sulfite. And I frankly make that pet nap because I think the bubbles save us, but I don't have any illusions about that wine, that when people say, hey, this is really good wine, I really like this wine, I probably put some of that away. I'm like, don't do that for a long time. This is not a 2-year wine, might be a 3-year wine if you're lucky, but no, I mean, it's already, the 2019 has already shown its legs. So it is that if you want to make good, great, exceptional, characterful wine, in my view, you must use sulfite, even at these modest levels. So I find the 75 ppm random and some even maybe meaningless with some of these websites, and look at the Raw Festival and wonder, is that an honest number? And as much respect as I have for Isabel, is that really reflective of what the priority ought to be? Yeah, I can look at some other.
We've had a few interesting chats. Are there any questions that anybody would like to ask?
Some great comments.
Yeah, I've saved them all.
Yeah, Brett points out as well that he's utilizing ingredient labeling since 2019, and I'll be honest, we have not yet. My winemaker is deeply troubled by the idea, and I'm not sure why, because we thus far have not needed yeast additions, not needed to add mallow bugs. We use modest amounts of sulfite. We might have to use a tiny amount of water, typically just to maybe make a decent environment for the acidity that we typically need to add because we're in a warm climate. But no, I mean, I don't feel like there's anything we shouldn't be talking about, but I'm trying to be honest and admit I'm a hypocrite thus far, because I have not bit the bullet and done what Brett and others have done. But yeah, Clark Smith points out that even though he's experimenting with honesty in the existing environment, honesty gets him thrown out of natural wine shops despite 21 successful sulfite-free vintages under his belt. There you go. I like Tom Elliott's comment. Vegan natural wines can contain insects. The biodynamic movement, of which I'm fascinated by, we're still struggling with whether or not this vineyard will be biodynamic regulated and codified. The notion of dumping large amounts of copper into the vineyard is horrifying to me, and that's completely allowable by those rules. So how are those good rules in my view? So yeah, I'm frustrated and confused by what we're supposed to do, and that's why I wanted to have hopefully a conversation in this regard.
We have a question from Amy right in the end there. Any thoughts on canned wine needing to be below 30 ppm per bottle in order to avoid linear issues? Are canned wine the best format for those seeking lower sulfites?
Yeah, struggling with that one as well, because I've toyed around with canned wines, not done it, but toyed around with it with some clients. And yeah, I free sulfur and total are different things. So I don't really see that canned wine in and of itself is the answer. It is an answer to waste. It is an answer to shipping costs, because glass bottles definitely create a problem there that cans to a degree rectify. But those wines don't last very long, and it's the packaging that is the problem in my view. So I don't know yet, aside from commercial to be consumed immediately types of wines, whether canned wine is really a long-term answer for people like me who are trying to make wines that can age in the cellar.
I like Clark. Straight up. So what's your answer? Is there such a thing as unnatural wine?
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's fair enough. Clark is right to ask that question, and really yeah, I'm sure they're out there, but the stores that I walk into to buy a bottle of wine aren't necessarily going to have those. Fermentation is a natural process that we've decided to jump into the middle of and slow it down, if you will, and get it to stop at a different place than the vinegar that it intends to get to. So somebody could say that that's unnatural, and I'd say there's 10,000 years of winemaking to suggest that it's not unnatural. It is like so many other things that we discuss when we talk about our environment and man's impact upon our environment. We must come to grips, be responsible for our impact upon the environment, not to pretend there is an idyllic past or future where we will not have any impact upon the environment at all. We must choose what impact to have and what is best. And so without question. And yeah, Brett brings up the Walla Walla potassium problem. Oh, it's a real problem. So yeah, if you're going to do no SO2, you're going to have to do something else, because those are high pH soups that you're starting with. And as I say, in our case, it's pretty simple. We're harvesting fairly early, so tartaric additions aren't that big a deal. For us, don't really have to do much of that at all because we're harvesting when pHs aren't quite so high, but the pHs can be high anyway, depending upon where you are in Walla Walla. And so no sulfite wine is a dreadful idea at the end of the day. We like making that small amount of sparkling wine, and that's about how much we think we can make responsibly without using sulfite. Yeah, Clark points out, and this wines are highly manipulated. Those aren't grapes you put in the glass. But he also says, that no wine is as heavily manipulated as beer, and nobody dishes dirt at brewers. Well, people do dish dirt at brewers too, and I think brewers could be an easy straw man in this conversation, partly because I'm still convinced that the reason that young consumers are tolerant of these, what I consider flawed wines, is because they've been raised, if you will, on Brettanomyces ridden beers, and now believe if there isn't a certain amount of funk, and I don't mean that word kindly, in those beers, then that is just not a real beer. It just has no character. And they're willing to encompass and even embrace wines that smell like anything other than terroir and anything other than fruit, because they have been trained by brewers who like to play on the margins, and not to tell them to stop doing that. Once again, we're going to have to take responsibility and be honest with people, or we don't have a leg to stand on in this argument, in my view. So yeah, back to Clark's question, all wine on some level could be called unnatural, because we're doing something to it, but that's what we do. The food substances, other than the stuff we pull off a tree and bite into immediately, and I do wash it usually. So already manipulating. So right, yeah, we are part of the environment. It's okay if we take our food substances and work with them. What people are, of course, are objecting to are chemicals they don't understand, or chemicals that are being hidden from them, being used to manipulate the flavor, and that to them suddenly becomes unnatural. And my view is, one, there are plenty of natural products that we can use, like sulfite, if you will, or bentonite, that can help us massage the flavors to where we want them to be and to be retained. And two, if we were open and honest about this, then maybe we wouldn't have to have this argument that somehow something unnatural is happening behind those walls.
I just want to, the comments and questions are rolling in, which I love. I do see the time. Doug, if you're okay with continuing this, then okay, but maybe we can just take a couple more and then call it a day. Because
yeah, what
you stirred something up. I get the feeling.
Oh no, it's great. I mean, it is. All of us are struggling with these issues, and so I do like Tom Elliott's. The ingredient label, the ideal ingredient labeling should include spoilage organisms. So ingredients contains grapes, Brettanomyces, volatile acidity, purple prose, hyperbole, and bullshit. Yeah, that sounds about right. That would be. That's actually a label that would appeal to me a lot. I would buy that wine. Brett's talking about picking at 3.3, sorry, pH, and then post ML getting a shift up to 3.7. So if you're gonna dodge the flaws, you need to bottle early, sterile filter, and being at that kind of pH, he notes that the chemistry doesn't allow for anything else. Certainly, you damn well better have your sulfite levels where you need them to be to protect a wine like that, because that is a wine waiting to grow unpleasant things. And Brett asks finally the rhetorical question: what's worse, adding SO2 or tartaric? I compare that to my question earlier. What's worse, using a miticide in one application a year, or driving up and down the rows of our vineyard every week for weeks on end, spewing CO2 and wasting gas to put a more natural spray on there. And I'm struggling with that issue. Frankly, the answer seems to me obvious, that one application of miticide is a more responsible behavior in that vineyard, just so long as it is a, as minimal an application as is possible. But I'm not a viticulturalist, so there's, I'm sure, people on who are better informed than I am. And Boyd Nielsen points out, that according to Isabelle Legeron, who, again, I respect enormously, but DRC is and has always been a natural wine. So Boyd says, I heartily agree that honest qualitative assessments are past due in the natty world. There's no valid excuse for making wines that don't taste of a grape and a place. Well, some people do like those funky, weird wines. So there is a place for those, but not at my table.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. I think we'll stop taking comments and questions. As Brett says, yeah, the wine is a multifactorial challenge, absolutely. And the important thing is to continue such conversations and bring these different perspectives on the table. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you all to the guests for being here.
Yeah, thank you to these incredibly well-informed and smart guests who, like I say, know more than I do about many of these issues.
And engaged. I'm so happy to see people actually asking questions and partaking in the conversation. Very often when you have something like this online, then people tend to sit back, listen, and that's it. So I think it's also a testament to the kind of speaker you are that we've had this kind of response.
Well, thank you. It's very kind. Thanks for allowing us this platform.
And Clark, I will be in touch with you. Thank you for joining us and encouraging just this conversation going forward as well. On that note, once again, a massive thank you. I know I've said it a few times already, to everybody who's joined us here. Feel free to drop Doug a line, and feel free to drop us a line at Wine Unites in case of any questions. We've had Gary Brooks, is filtration natural? I think I'll allow this last one and then we close.
Yeah, well, once again, are we using products that add flavors, or are we simply trying to remove physical compounds for an aesthetic view so that the wine is clear, or are we trying to remove certain other compounds like phenolic compounds? So for my part, we use filtration because I see it as a responsible behavior for a wine that's going into bottle. So I don't consider it unnatural, but I certainly understand that some people have issues with, egg white finding and things like that. I just don't agree with them. So great. Well, thank you again.
Thank you, everybody. And yeah, feel free to write to Doug. Feel free to follow us on social, write to us there or on hello@Wine Unites. Hope you all have a great rest of the day or evening, wherever you are, a great rest of the week. Stay safe. We're hopefully towards the end of this nonsense, but a few more months and hopefully life will be back to normal. We've all said that before, but fingers crossed this time it's true.
Sounds
Thank you.
good.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.